I've been curious about what caused the Gulf War illness. How did that affect the brains of 150,000 military personnel in a way that's lasted for 30 years now? I'm Robert Haley, MD, at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center, where I've been doing research on Gulf War illness for about 30 years.
So, can you tell me more about this particular study that was published in Scientific Reports?
In 1990, Saddam Hussein's Iraqi army invaded Kuwait and the United States and a bunch of coalition countries. We sent 700,000 troops halfway around the world to the Middle East with all their high tech equipment, waged basically a 6 week war, a 5 week air bombing campaign, and then a 5 day ground assault, mainly a tank battle. And it was over. And it was just a one-sided victory with very few casualties on the American side, and completely uh, won the won it and expelled the Iraqi army from Kuwait, which they never returned. Uh, but as the troops were starting to come home, about a quarter of the 700,000 people developed some strange symptoms like chronic fatigue, cognitive problems, that is, memory problems, concentration problems, balance disturbances, like feelings of vertigo and difficulty exercising, getting unusually fatigued, severe diarrhea, skin rashes, a depressed feeling, and body pain. And these symptoms have lasted now for 30 years. Most of the people who got it have not gotten well, and it ended many military careers, the majority of them. And so it's a very serious problem. But when they came home, initial investigations looked into it and were unable to find out what it was or what caused it or what to do about it. And so pretty soon it was decided that we'll just call it stress. They got stressed from being deployed, like PTSD, and we'll use group psychotherapy, which is cheap. Early on, we did a study relevant now to this study that we just published. We were the first to do a brain imaging study. We used a technique called magnetic resonance spectroscopy. Now, every
Mhm.
laboratory in the world that measures anything uses MR spectroscopy, or NMR is another word for it, to measure chemical concentrations in test tubes or whatever. Radiologists learned how to use a brain scanner to do an MR spectroscopy analysis. So you could actually train the scanner on a small area of the deep brain, like, say, a sugar cube size little volume of the brain. You could focus the scanner down on that and run the MR spectroscopy scan routine, and it gives you a chemical readout of what's the chemical concentrations in the deep part of the brain without having any effects on the person, which is pretty amazing. Uh, and so we did this on a large group of sick veterans and some veterans who served in the war but had remained well. So the cases and the controls. And we found that sure enough, the cases had a low level of a couple of chemicals. Actually, there's a ratio. Uh, One of them is called NAA, and the other is creatine. You may have heard people taking creatine supplement. Brain, your brain is full of creatine because that's the energy. Has to do with the energy supply of the brain. What we found is the ratio of the NAA to creatine was low, but back then the equipment that we had to use wasn't good enough to tell us, was it a decrease in NAA or an increase in creatine, either of which would cause the ratio to go down. And we
Mhm.
really couldn't interpret, and in fact, we really suspected it was a decrease in NAA, which would have meant damage to neurons. That would be very bad because once you lose brain cells, it's kind of over. There's nothing you can do about that.
What does it mean when the creatine level is high in the brain?
There is a decrease in the amount of energy in the brain, and creatine is the brain is trying to increase creatine in order to compensate and bring the energy level back up. And so there's one main cause of having insufficient energy. Uh, And by energy, we mean there's a chemical called ATP, which is the main energy supply of the brain. And when ATP is low and energy is low, that means that the little part of a cell, the part of every cell uh, called a mitochondrion, every cell has a bunch of little mitochondria in there, and they're pumping out ATP and energy. Okay. Well, if your energy is low, that means the mitochondria are not doing their job. So, what this does, it points to mitochondrial dysfunction causing low ATP or low brain energy. We know that then cascades on and produces ultimately neuroinflammation.
So is the mitochondria damaged or just not producing? It's not responding like efficiently, or do you know maybe what is happening?
There can be some things that damage the genes that produce those things, but we think there's something upstream from that that is damaging that. And now that we have this information, we really can go upstream now and look for what are the root cause of Gulf War illness, and we can find a root cause. We can hopefully then engineer a treatment, and when you treat the root cause, you can expect a major improvement in the symptoms, maybe even a cure of the disease. Whereas if you're downstream, uh, attacking these intermediate steps, you can get some symptomatic relief, but it's generally not complete and certainly not a cure.
What could be a potential reason? What could be upstream?
We now know that all kinds of influences in your life can change your genes without necessarily causing a mutation. This is called epigenetics. Uh, and what we know is that chemical exposures can cause chemical reactions that certain little molecules can attach to a gene and change the function of that gene. Usually, the sometimes it's a good change, and some of these what are called epigenetic changes can be for the better, or can actually be used by the body for appropriate things. But others, particularly when they're caused by environmental exposures, they tend to be bad. They tend to interfere with the function of the gene. So that's one of my prime targets now is epigenetics. But there are other receptors in cells that could be damaged by chemicals, and some receptors could then work downstream to impair the function of mitochondria. Uh, and it's just a matter of doing the studies that look at all of those possibilities and see if we can eliminate a bunch of them and narrow down on the one that it is, because it's probably only one thing. And if it is, and we find it, most modern medicines, let me say this, back in the old days, hundreds of years ago and 100 years ago, when a lot of our very effective medicines were discovered, they were often discovered by accident, or somebody made a guess and they happened to be right, one out of 100 times. And those really lucky events led to a lot of our medicines. But then we've, over the last decades, we've run out of luck. And in Gulf War, people have been trying to find treatments based on kind of guesswork and a few clues that we've got, but nothing has really been real. It's not been really effective yet. And so when luck runs out, you go to what's called the rational approach of treatment development, and that is to go down and spend years doing the basic biochemical work and so forth, like we're doing to find out what the pathway is, what the mechanism, the biochemical pathway that's damaged,
Mhm.
and then you can design a drug that will alter that. See, and that's a much more certain way of going. It's by no means certain, but it's much better than just trying to by guesswork.
So mitochondria can be repaired, it sounds like.
If they're malfunctioning, there are many ways to correct that malfunction. Wait,
Mm.
It means repairing a damaged mitochondrial or fixing something upstream that would then bring it back in line with its normal function. Yeah, there are a number of things that could do that uh, to find out which one is going to work because you can't test them all.
So, your study suggests that by fixing mitochondrial function, you could help veterans feel better. What kind of treatments might this lead to?
There would probably be a medication that they would take. Now, it's possible that there might be a medication regimen that you give for, say, several months and it corrects the problem. That is possible. Or it may be that you give one medicine that fixes the receptor, and you got to take that forever to keep the receptor fixed. But once the receptor is fixed, that might cure the disease. It's like diabetes. You take insulin and you can be virtually normal, live a normal life, but you haven't cured the disease. You just have to keep taking the insulin. Well, the same thing here, if that were the case. Another possibility is that you can find a medication like that fixes the receptor as long as you're taking it. But then it may be that other processes like inflammation have been started and have been going so long that they won't reverse themselves just by fixing the root cause. It's too late to overcome this ongoing inflammation by just fixing the root cause. And so in that case, you might give the first medicine to fix the receptor, keep the receptor working, and then come up with some other medicine that would temporarily stop the inflammation and sort of interrupt that vicious cycle. See, so and then you could maybe take that for a month or two and fix that, and then then uh, then you could just take the first medicine again for the rest of your life, and hopefully we find something that would be. Ideally, you would find a medicine that's already FDA approved for other purposes, and then you could just take that might be inexpensive, and you could take that the rest of your life. That would and be restored to a reasonably normal life.
How do damaged mitochondria explain symptoms like brain fog, fatigue, and chronic pain, and those symptoms of Gulf War illness?
First of all, you can see how the mitochondrial dysfunction and mitochondria normally produce the energy of the brain. The ATP, which is the energy active molecule that produces the energy. And you can see if that gets low, then you've got low brain energy. And so you can see how that would cause fatigue. And if this is happening in muscle cells, you can see how this would then affect exercise tolerance. See, these veterans, if they go out and lift weights or go run a mile, back when they were in the military, they could run 5 miles with no problem. Well, now if they run around the block, a lot of them are sick for a month. Uh, and so you can see how if this is occurring in the muscles, that would explain that. But the inflammation, is the cascade from uh, mitochondrial dysfunction, low energy, low to ATP, and that generally then produces neuroinflammation. Inflammation, well, you know what inflammation is. If you skin your arm, it becomes inflamed as part of the healing process, and that hurts. You touch it and it hurts. Well, you can imagine if your brain is inflamed, uh, all sorts of things are going to go wrong. Do you think that's probably the source of so much of this?
What you're saying is that it's not only the brain cells, not only in the brain, it's also in the muscles and other cells as well, possibly.
That's correct.
Are the symptoms subsiding over 30 years, or are they staying the same as they always were?
The first symptoms began actually as people were beginning to come home. There was a delay after the exposure of maybe 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Some were getting sick in the while they were still there, and then others as they were coming home, and then many after they got home. And out to maybe a year, people were still getting the symptoms for the first time. So there was a long delay. Uh, but then the symptoms then tend to increase for several months and then level off. And then they remain pretty stable for 30 years. Although we're now starting to see development of new things, but I think that's a combination of things that would effects of aging, normal effects of aging, but also I think aging, as you age, you lose cells, and in your brain you lose brain cells. We're all losing brain cells after age 25 or so. You start losing a few brain cells here and there, and as you lose brain cells, I think you're uncovering uh, symptoms that your brain has been able to control. And as you lose some brain cells, you lose that control, and those symptoms start being expressed. So some people are getting a little bit worse as they get older. Others, I think, are staying the same. Very rarely has anybody really gotten over this.
You've done so much work in this area. I mean, there's so much that you've looked at and have been, just recognizing that sarin causes this genetic change and the genetic malfunction. That was a few years ago that you came up with that, right? So it's a whole process to be able to get to this point. I hope that you will be on your way to find the treatment for it.
We're working virtually all the time for 30 years. 30 years, if you keep working at it, you can find out a lot.
There's a lot of persistence, right?
There are few subjects that I find this rewarding. Got 150,000 of our great military personnel that were in the peak of health and fitness and went over and served in this war on behalf of our country, and came back wounded. And since they had no external wounds, they were not taken seriously often, and that was very demoralizing. And to be able to try to address that and make good, I know everybody in our country would believe that we should do that. We should do what we can to make good to these heroes, and so that's been an extremely rewarding part of this.
Is there a way that a lot of these veterans are aware of the work that you're doing and are updated on what's happening?
Yeah, I think so. There are media outlets that they pay attention to that have been uh, dutifully reporting our findings as well as other scientists in this field.
Thank you, Dr. Haley. And I look forward to seeing the next announcement about what is happening in your work. So I wish you all the best.
Curious by Nature is a production of Newswise. More than 7,000 journalists get the Newswise wires. Visit newswise.com and find out how to spread your news today.